The gate opens, hailed as economic revival. Behind tourism lies a silent labor network, flexible, unseen.
ID and benefit.
The system counts, the spirit calls.
This is the brief on Korea's visa-free policy and the structure of labor and surveillance. So Korea recently kicked off this 15-day visa-free trial for Chinese tour groups. Officially, yeah, it's about boosting the economy. But look a little closer and some analysts see it differently, like an invisible gate, maybe. Mainly to get easy access to low-cost, flexible workers, kind of sidestepping all those complex visa rules already there. Okay, let's break down the 3 key things you really need to grasp about what might be going on underneath. First, getting around the usual visa checks. That basically creates what some call a survival trap. See, unlike places like Australia with their bridging visa that keeps things legal while sorting stuff out, Korea doesn't have that. This setup kind of pushes people towards risking an illegal stay. And what does that mean? Well, it supplies the market, especially think platform delivery jobs, with cheap workers, but the government doesn't really have to deal with providing benefits or support. Second, managing this kind of labor force effectively, that needs some serious digital oversight. It all hinges on what's called administrative visibility. You know, keeping track through things like ID renewals. This lets the government be really precise with stuff like taxes. And think about those big data leaks we've seen lately. Well, linking up government data access with managing migration, that just makes this digital control even more powerful. And finally, guess who benefits big time? The attention economy and those giant platform companies. It's like bread and circuses 2.0 people. Get absorbed in stuff at home, like streaming, gaming, deliveries, maybe distracted by bigger external issues. This keeps everyone inside the system, right? And you see it in the numbers. Companies like Coupang, their growth is strong, showing how money's made of this efficient, but pretty high-risk setup built on this pool of flexible workers. So while the official story is tourism, what's really telling here is how the flexible labor market is changing and how digital control is getting tighter and more precise.
Welcome back to the deep dive. Our mission here, as always, is to get past the headlines, the official statements.
Exactly. We take all this dense policy stuff and try to show the underlying logic, the structure behind it all.
What the source material we're looking at calls seeing the essence, the usha, of how things actually work.
And today, we're looking at a really interesting, very rapid policy shift. It's being sold pretty heavily as just a straightforward economic boost.
You mean the new visa-free pilot program?
That's the one. The official line is, look, this is simple. It's about getting more tourism revenue flowing. But when you really start to unpack the details,
It looks different.
it starts to function more like what we're calling an invisible gateway. So we want to explore how this gateway, supposedly just for tourists, actually structures access to low-wage labor.
And how it ties into administrative control through data as well.
Right. It's all connected. We're not just giving you the news summary here. We're trying to figure out why the system is set up this way. What's the underlying function?
Okay, great. Let's start right at the beginning then, the immediate context. The shock and the opening of this invisible gate.
Right. So the official story is pretty clear. The government's feeling the pressure, needs to do something about the economy.
Yeah, that's the narrative. Revitalize things. And the chosen tool. Open the doors, let the consumer cash flow in.
And our sources, Reuters included, they give us the specifics. Korea started this 15-day visa-free pilot. It kicked off September 29th, 2025.
Right, and it's specifically for mainland Chinese group tourists. That's important, groups of 3 or more.
And it runs until June next year, so a limited time, specific group.
Exactly. You have to notice the specifics here. Group tourists, short stay, specific region. This isn't throwing the doors wide open for everyone.
It's targeted.
Very targeted.
Yep.
It feels like a release valve, designed for, let's say, maximum economic impact, but with minimal administrative hassle.
The idea being, come in, spend your money, and then leave.
That seems to be the surface level expectation, yes. Simple transaction. But wow, the reaction on the ground was anything but simple. The friction it caused. It was immediate.
Intense, yeah. Just 3 days after it started, October 2nd, the government was already directing crackdowns on anti-foreigner sentiment, on protests.
3 days? That's incredibly fast.
It really is. And that speed tells you something, doesn't it? It reveals this deep political tension simmering just below the surface.
The government must have known this would happen.
They clearly anticipated it. They knew bringing in a large, new, highly visible group, even temporarily, would likely trigger some public anxiety, and they moved instantly to manage that.
So managing the social fallout was part of the plan from day one.
It suggests that whatever the real structural purpose of this policy is, it's important enough to the government that they're willing to pay the price of managing that social friction.
Okay, so that brings us right to the core question, the hypothesis for this deep dive, getting to the essence of it. If the stated goal, the public line, is purely about tourism dollars, what's the actual systemic interest here? What function does this policy serve beyond just consumer spending?
Could this door, framed as a tourism boost, actually be functioning as an invisible gateway, a way to secure a supply of low-wage, highly flexible labor?
An invisible gateway. So the tourism aspect is just the visible part of the structure.
Potentially. When we talk about structural function, we mean what the system actually allows or maybe incentivizes, regardless of what the official policy document says.
So if the outcome is more short-term, low-rights labor becomes available.
Then structurally speaking, that outcome is a core incentive. It might not be written down anywhere, but it's what the system produces.
And the tourism label.
That becomes the, let's say, the political cover, the acceptable face for what might actually be a critical labor market strategy.
Okay. So to understand how a tourism policy could function as a labor strategy, we need to see what it's bypassing. What filters is it avoiding?
Exactly. Let's get into part one, bypassing the filters and what we're calling the structural trap. Okay, so before this pilot program came along, getting into the country legally involved navigating this incredibly complex system. It's often described as like a bureaucratic maze.
How complex are we talking?
Well, the sources state Korea operates with visa filters that exceed 200 detailed categories.
200? Seriously? That's staggering.
It is. Think about that. It's not just, tourist visa, work visa, student visa. It's C1, C1A, C1B, H27 for a very specific type of manufacturing. E7 for certain tech skills. It just goes on and on.
Wow. It almost sounds like it's designed to make entry difficult, or at least highly specialized for every single person.
Well, whether it's designed that way or just evolved, the effect is immense administrative friction. And maybe more importantly, it creates massive unpredictability for applicants.
Oh.
Imagine spending months gathering documents for, say, a highly specific E-Series work visa. You think you've got everything perfect. But then some administrator interprets one tiny subclause of one of those 200 categories slightly differently.
And you're rejected.
Exactly. And our sources point out this complexity leads to frequent controversies about consistency. Because realistically, how can any single official apply 200 super detailed rules perfectly every single time across millions of potential applications?
Right. So the system ends up being rigid on paper, but kind of unpredictable, maybe even chaotic in practice.
That's a good way to put it. And that's where the new pilot program comes in. From a purely structural efficiency standpoint, its beauty lies in the bypass.
It just cuts through all that red tape.
It temporarily short-circuits the entire maze. It allows for quick bulk entry. No need for that intense individual case-by-case screening that the 200 categories demand.
So it shows that when the government feels the economic need is urgent enough,
The bureaucracy can suddenly become very simple, very fast.
but that simplification, does it expose a weakness?
It definitely highlights a fundamental flaw, or maybe just a focus, in the existing administrative approach. Current immigration management tends to focus almost entirely on the point of entry.
What you called static management earlier?
Exactly. They check your papers, make sure you're part of the approved group, stamp your passport, let you in, check, done.
Okay, so what's wrong with that? What does focusing only on the entry point miss?
It misses, or maybe just doesn't have a mechanism for, the realities during the stay. Once someone is inside, past that initial check, the system lacks a robust structure to manage changes in their circumstances.
Like what kind of changes?
Anything, really. A death in the family back home, a personal illness, maybe the tour group itself falls apart for some reason, or, and this is crucial, a sudden, unexpected economic need arises for the individual.
The system isn't built for that dynamism.
It's designed to check the box on arrival. It's not really set up to dynamically manage the complexities of human life after arrival.
And this is where we get to that core mechanism you mentioned, the part our sources call the survival trap, or meikoga. We need to trace this really clearly. How does a person who came in as a 15-day group tourist end up in the flexible labor pool?
Okay, it generally happens through a combination of, say, isolation and basic necessity. Let's picture a tourist who came with a registered group.
Right.
Maybe they deliberately separate from the group. Or maybe circumstances force it. They lose their passport, they miss the return flight, they run out of money unexpectedly.
Okay.
Suddenly, their official status, short-term group tourist, offers them zero legal way to earn money. The official visa pathways, those 200 categories, are closed off to them in that situation.
They can't just apply for a work visa from inside.
Not easily or quickly, especially not without support or resources. So they face a stark choice. Try to get home somehow, maybe penniless and in trouble, or find a way to survive right here.
And survival means finding work, any work.
Exactly. And what's the most immediately accessible work? It's the platform economy, right? The gig work.
Food delivery, quick cleaning gigs, maybe some small cash-in-hand tasks.
Precisely. Jobs that often operate under the radar, maybe pay cash, or only require minimal ID checks for the really basic tasks.
So the system doesn't need an explicit recruitment drive for undocumented workers.
Not at all. It just needs to create the conditions where falling into undocumented status becomes the most rational, perhaps the only choice for survival for some people.
And then, boom, the individual is absorbed.
Absorbed directly into that platform labor pool. They provide cheap, flexible, often disposable labor exactly where the market, especially the gig economy, has a high demand for it.
That's the structural funnel. It's not necessarily intentional policy, but it's the functional outcome of the system's design.
That's the critical distinction we need to see clearly. Hashtag tag 3, the state's dual benefit and risk tolerance.
Okay, so if this funnel exists and it seems structurally plausible, then the outcome suggests a kind of mutual benefit, doesn't it? For the state and for certain parts of the market anyway, though maybe not for the individual caught in it.
It does look that way. The state, or at least the economy it oversees, gets access to cheap, flexible labor. That's a huge potential subsidy, especially for the platform companies.
And what does the state save by allowing this? Or by not preventing it?
It saves on liability,
Yeah.
on cost. By expanding this low rights access category, or by tolerating the drift into undocumented status, the state effectively minimizes its exposure to things like welfare obligations, Social Security contributions, healthcare costs, the administrative overhead of long-term integration programs.
They get the labor without the long-term social commitments that usually come with resident workers.
Structurally, yes. It's a highly efficient way from a purely economic perspective to source precarity, to get labor on demand without the strings attached.
Wow. Okay, to really grasp the essence here, this idea of structural tolerance, you suggested comparing it to a system designed differently.
Right. We need contrast. Our sources point to the Australian model as a useful comparison, specifically their bridging visa system.
A bridging visa? What does that do?
It's designed precisely to prevent the kind of situation we just described, where someone becomes undocumented unintentionally due to administrative processes.
Okay, give us an example. How does it work?
Let's use the example you touched on. Say someone is in Australia on a student visa. It's about to expire. But they've applied for a skilled work visa, a different category entirely.
And processing that new application might take months, right?
Exactly. Maybe 6 months, maybe longer. Now, in the system we described earlier, that person could easily fall into undocumented status during that gap, just waiting for the bureaucracy.
Through no fault of their own, really.
Correct. The bridging visa stops that. It's a temporary legal visa status that's often granted automatically when someone applies for a new substantive visa while their current one is still valid.
So it bridges the gap.
Precisely. It ensures the person remains legally resident. And crucially, in many cases, it allows them to retain work rights while they wait for the decision on their main application.
The whole point is to minimize unintended illegality.
That's the core principle baked into the structure. The Australian system basically says, we expect people to follow the rules, so we're going to build mechanisms to help them do that, even when our own processes are slow.
That's a fundamental difference in structural philosophy.
It really is. And the lack of a similar robust bridging mechanism in Korea, which our sources highlight, is very telling.
What does it tell us?
It leads directly to that core structural hypothesis we're exploring. The absence of a proactive, preventative tool, like a bridging visa, suggests a system that, at the very least, implicitly tolerates the risk of illegal residency.
Or maybe even finds it useful.
One could argue it implicitly utilizes that risk. Why build a bridge if the people falling into the gap actually provide a necessary low-cost labor input for a booming part of the economy?
So it's not necessarily a mistake or an oversight in the policy design.
It could be seen as a deliberate design choice, a choice that prioritizes structural flexibility for the economy over predictability and security for the individual worker.
That insight really cuts through the surface narrative. Okay, but once you have this pool of low-rights labor, whether they're technically legal short-termers or undocumented, the state still needs ways to manage them, right?
Absolutely. You need tools. Which brings us neatly to part 2, the politics of visibility and data control.
Okay, so whether someone is here on a short, restrictive visa or they've fallen into that survival trap and are undocumented, the state needs some way to track or exert influence. This is where administrative visibility comes in.
Exactly. It's a simple but powerful concept. Things like issuing IDs, residency permits, renewing qualifications, even just registering for taxes. Yeah. All these actions grant the state administrative visibility.
You become known to the system.
You become visible. And visibility is the absolute prerequisite for any kind of targeted action by the state. You can't target what you can't see.
What kinds of targeted actions are we talking about here? What does visibility enable?
We're talking about pretty precise control mechanisms. First, obviously, targeted taxation, making sure even low-level income can be traced and taxed if the system decides to.
Okay, makes sense.
Second, resource allocation decisions. Visibility allows the state to decide precisely who gets access to public services, maybe housing support, certain types of health care, education subsidies, and just as importantly, who doesn't.
Right, drawing lines.
And third, maybe the most potent lever, the ability to reduce or limit benefits or rights almost instantly. Once you're visible in the system, your access level can be recalibrated. You could be moved from a higher rights status to a lower rights one with potentially just a few clicks in a database.
That sounds like an enormous concentration of power, especially if it's digitally managed. How does the public generally come to accept these kinds of precise control mechanisms? They can sound quite intrusive.
Well, this is where a specific political strategy often comes into play, something our sources refer to as the ratio dilution strategy.
Ratio dilution. Okay, break that down for us.
It's a technique used to minimize public resistance when introducing new forms of control or surveillance. It's quite clever, in a way.
How does it work? Give us a concrete example.
Okay, let's imagine the government wants to introduce, say, a new type of ID card. Maybe it uses biometrics, tracks movement more closely, and links your employment status directly to your right to reside in a certain area.
Right, something potentially controversial.
Highly controversial if rolled out to everyone at once. The public pushback would likely be huge. So instead of doing that, the government applies this new, more restrictive ID category first to a smaller, perhaps less politically powerful group.
Like who?
Maybe temporary migrant workers in one specific industry, or maybe students from certain countries, or perhaps, like in our current discussion, a subset of short-term visa holders.
A group that doesn't have a loud political voice or broad public sympathy.
Exactly. The ratio of the population directly affected is small. So the general public anxiety is diluted. Most people aren't impacted directly, so they don't protest strongly. Maybe they don't even notice.
Okay, so the new control gets implemented quietly on the margins.
Right. And once the mechanism itself, the biometric tracking, the specific way benefits are limited based on the ID, once that tool is successfully implemented and normalized for that initial small group, it does two things.
What are they?
First, it proves the technology and the administrative process work. Second, it standardizes the tool of control itself. It creates a precedent.
And then it can be expanded later.
It paves the way for gradual expansion. Maybe next it's applied to another category of visa holders, then maybe certain types of welfare recipients, and eventually, potentially, it becomes universalized, applied to citizens too.
So the infrastructure of control is built piece by piece, starting where resistance is lowest.
That's the essence of ratio dilution. And it shows why understanding the structural design today is so important, because it really can define the reality for everyone tomorrow. #tag5, data governance, precision, and risk. And this whole push for more visibility, more control, it's happening in a world where data is everything, right? It's the key currency.
Yeah.
So we need to see this desire for administrative control in the context of, well, responsible data governance. What's the global standard?
Where do we look for that?
A good benchmark is the 2022 OECD Principles on Government Access to Privately Held Personal Data.
Okay, the OECD. What do they say? Can governments access our private data held by companies?
They acknowledge that, yes, governments sometimes need access for legitimate reasons like fighting serious crime or protecting national security. That's accepted.
But there are limits, right?
Crucially, yes. The OECD insisted on strict rights-respecting limits. The key principles are things like necessity. The access has to be genuinely required for a specific legitimate goal. It can't be a fishing expedition.
Okay, necessary? What else?
Proportionality. The scope of the data access must be limited to what's strictly needed for that purpose. You can't just grab everything.
Right, keep it focused.
And maybe the most important check, independent oversight. The government can't just decide on its own to access data whenever it wants. There needs to be some form of external, independent check and balance, maybe judicial approval, maybe an independent watchdog to prevent arbitrary or unlimited access.
So that's the ideal framework. Access is possible, but it's limited, necessary, proportional, and overseen.
That's the responsible standard set by the OECD.
Now, let's contrast that with the domestic reality here, because collecting all this data, aiming for that precise control, carries enormous risks, doesn't it? Especially if the systems aren't secure.
Huge risks. And we have a very recent, very stark example. Our sources flagged the massive SK Telecom data leak.
Right. That was August 2025. How many people were affected?
Reports say data from 27 million individuals. 27 million.
That's almost half the population. Incredible.
It resulted in a very large fine from the PIPC, the Personal Information Protection Commission. But the sheer scale of it just highlights profound vulnerabilities in how data is handled and secured.
Both in the private sector, where SK Telecom sits, and potentially in the government systems that connect with or rely on that private data.
Exactly. There's an ecosystem there, and clearly it has weaknesses.
So we have this tension. On one hand, there's a clear institutional drive towards more data integration, linking immigration status, tax records, maybe location data, platform work history.
All to increase that administrative visibility and control we talked about.
But on the other hand, the demonstrated capacity to actually secure all that sensitive integrated data seems, well, shaky at best.
It creates a real structural paradox, and it leads us to a crucial conclusion, or at least a hypothesis, about control.
Which is?
If this institutional drive succeeds, if they manage to combine and streamline data access across migration, labor, finance, maybe even health, the power dynamic shifts dramatically.
How so?
The hypothesis is that the precision of control will increase drastically. We move from managing broad populations to potentially micromanaging individuals.
The ability to target, track, perhaps limit the rights or movements of specific people based purely on their digital trail.
That capability becomes embedded in the state's administrative structure. It's a feature, not a bug.
And it would allow the system to achieve that tricky balance you mentioned earlier.
Potentially, yes.
Yeah.
Utilize the flexible low-rights labor when needed, but also have the administrative power to instantly locate, restrict, or remove that labor if there's social unrest or if administrative priorities change.
But for that level of fine-grained control to operate smoothly, without constant friction, the general population needs to be looking elsewhere, right?
Precisely. Their attention needs to be absorbed, which is the perfect lead-in to part 3, the attention economy and the companies that thrive in it, the platform winners.
Okay, so if the deep structure relies on things like managed precarity and increasing data control, things that might make people uneasy if they thought about them too much.
Then the system needs a way to manage public focus, to keep people from asking too many awkward questions about that underlying structure.
And our sources describe this using terms like the 3S strategy, or more classically, bread and circuses 2.0.
Right. It's essentially a sophisticated strategy for managing public attention, and it seems to work on 2 levels simultaneously.
What's the first level?
The external level. You channel public anxiety and division outwards. Focus attention on long-running historical grievances or current geopolitical tensions.
Our sources mention the South China Morning Post context here.
Yeah, suggesting that this external focus helps absorb political energy. It shifts the public's worry away from potential uncomfortable domestic structural issues.
So the idea is if people are debating history or worrying about external threats,
they're less likely to be focused on, say, the intricacies of visa policy and how it might be creating an undocumented workforce next door. It directs the collective energy outwards.
Okay, that's the external front. What's the second front?
The internal front. This is about attention absorption. You keep the public constantly engaged, maybe even overwhelmed, via personalized digital media.
You mean streaming services, games?
Exactly. The endless scroll, the binge-watching on OTT services, addictive mobile games, the instant gratification of delivery platforms, bringing food and goods right to your door.
Keep people entertained, distracted, and maybe physically indoors more often.
That seems to be the effect. It serves multiple purposes. It keeps potential social disruption lower because people are engaged elsewhere. And critically, it keeps consumption rates high.
And this constant absorption, this focus on the screen and on immediate satisfaction, that's the perfect environment for the platform economy to thrive, isn't it?
It's the crucial environmental factor. You're basically cultivating the ideal consumer for the very systems that rely on that cheap, flexible labor pool we identified earlier. The demand side and the supply side of the equation are both shaped by this attention management. #7. Evidence from platform labor and safety.
We need to ground this discussion, though. This isn't just abstract theory. We need to look at the actual workforce involved.
Absolutely. Academic research really backs up this picture of how platform labor is structured in Korea. We looked at studies from places like Science Direct, Wiley Online Library, serious peer-reviewed work.
And what does that research tell us about the reality of this work?
It paints a pretty stark picture, honestly. It confirms extremely high health and safety risks associated with many of these platform jobs.
Like delivery drivers, warehouse workers.
Yes, deadline-driven roles, often involving scooters and heavy traffic, late-night logistics work, physically demanding tasks. And crucially, the structure often means the workers themselves bear the brunt of the risk.
How so?
They often have to cover their own insurance, vehicle maintenance, protective gear. If they get injured, the platform company might have limited liability. Profit gets maximized for the platform, while the physical and financial risk is pushed onto the individual worker.
It externalizes the cost of doing business onto the most vulnerable part of the chain.
That's a good way to put it. And the research also confirms the demographic profile of who is disproportionately filling these high-risk roles.
Does it align with our discussion about migration?
It aligns very clearly. The studies specifically document a significant concentration of migrant workers within the delivery sector and related logistics infrastructure.
So it's not just a guess, it's statistically shown.
It's a verifiable structural feature of this part of the economy. So when you connect the dots.
Okay, let's connect them. We see a policy move, the visa pilot, that potentially creates a new pool of structurally precarious, low-rights individuals.
Right. Then we see academic evidence showing that the most dangerous, highest-risk platform jobs are already disproportionately filled by existing migrant worker populations.
The mechanism seems pretty clear. The demand created by the attention economy is met by a labor supply facilitated by a tolerant or even incentivizing visa structure.
The whole feedback loop reinforces itself, reducing people's external engagement, focusing consumption indoors. That drives demand for instant delivery and services.
Which in turn creates demand for the very labor pool that the visa structure seems to be making available, intentionally or not.
And this entire setup creates an incredibly favorable operating environment for the big players, the major platform companies.
And we can actually see this success, this favorable environment, reflected in the hard numbers, right? In the market itself.
Yes, the market data provides strong confirmation. Our sources pointed specifically to Coupang, ticker CPNG, as a prime example. They're obviously a dominant force in e-commerce and delivery here.
And the recent results were good.
Very good. We looked at their Q2 2025 results. Revenue hit $8.5 billion. That's up 16% compared to the same quarter the previous year.
16% growth on that scale is significant. What about profit?
Even stronger. Total profit was reported at $2.6 billion, which is up 20% year over year.
Wow.
And maybe the most important signal for sustainability. They confirmed they achieved operating profit, black, meaning they're consistently profitable now, and they highlighted margin improvement.
Margin improvement, that suggests they're getting more efficient.
Exactly. Better logistics, yes. Better warehousing, probably. But also, potentially, better optimization of their labor costs within this very structure we've been describing. They're making the model work financially and work well.
These aren't just random good numbers, then. You're saying they reflect the success of operating within this specific economic and structural environment.
They are evidence that the system, as currently structured, is highly beneficial for a company like Coupang.
And how does the financial market see them? Does it recognize this strength?
Market perception seems to align. Recent analysis mentioned a high relative strength and RS rating of 86.
What does an RS rating of 86 mean?
It basically means the stock's price performance has been stronger than 86% of all other stocks in the market over a certain period. It signals strong technical momentum, although the source did add a note of caution about needing to watch for pattern reformation.
But overall, a strong signal from the market.
A very strong signal. So the market hypothesis here seems pretty unavoidable.
Which is
the overall structured environment. Less external activity because people are distracted or controlled, mass attention focused indoors, driving consumption through platform.
It creates a kind of perfect storm.
A highly favorable ecosystem, maybe even a subsidized one, for companies in delivery, OTT streaming, and online retail. Their impressive valuations and profits aren't just down to brilliant management.
They're also a direct reflection of the administrative structure, the visa policy's tolerance for precarity, and the management of public attention.
That's the structural essence we were aiming to reveal. The pieces fit together to create this outcome.
Okay. We've taken apart the policy, looked at the control mechanisms, seen who benefits economically. That's the analysis. Now we need to pivot. We've seen the structure. How should we think about responding? Ethically, structurally, right? This kind of analysis can feel quite critical, quite heavy, so we need to be really clear about the aim here.
Absolutely. The goal of doing this kind of deep dive, of looking at the structure, is never, ever about making individuals the enemy.
Whether that's the administrator trying to apply 200 complex rules, or the worker caught in that survival trap just trying to get by.
Exactly. The core message, which actually comes through in the source material itself, is that the focus should be on the structure, not the people caught within it.
The structure is the enemy, so to speak.
That's the idea. Think about it. ID systems, data collection, benefit rules, these are just tools. They're morally neutral in themselves.
They can be used for good or for ill.
Precisely. They can be instruments of support, integration, making society work better for everyone. Or they can become tools of division, exclusion, control, and creating precarity.
So when we try to understand the essence, we have to look at how these tools are actually being deployed in practice.
The deployment reveals the structural logic, the true intent, or at least the true function. The official policy narrative might talk about tourism.
But the reality on the ground, the functional outcome, seems to be more about sourcing cheap labor and managing mass attention.
And it's crucial for you, the listener, to see that gap between the official story and the functional reality. Because that gap is where the system exerts its leverage, often silently.
Okay, so having seen that gap, having understood the structure, we can now talk about solutions, not just complaining about the problem, but proposing structural changes that aim for a better outcome.
Right. If we accept the analysis that the current structure incentivizes precarity, then any ethical policy response has to directly address those incentives.
We need to move away from just control towards something more like predictability and integration.
Exactly. So let's outline a few key recommendations based on the issues we've identified.
Where do we start? The most immediate issues seem to be people falling into that unintended illegal status.
Yes. So recommendation 1, introduce a transitional stay device. This is essentially that bridging visa concept we discussed, adapted for the Korean context.
A mechanism to prevent status lapse.
It's a proactive administrative tool. It provides a legal safety net, a status bridge, for people caught by bureaucratic delays or facing sudden, unavoidable changes in circumstance. It directly removes the structural pressure to become undocumented just to survive.
Okay, that makes sense. What's next? The complexity issue.
Absolutely. Recommendation 2, streamline the system. 200-plus visa categories is just asking for inconsistency and frustration.
It needs simplification.
Drastic simplification. Cut down those categories to a much smaller, more manageable set of clear, predictable visa classifications. This would reduce the administrative chaos, improve fairness, and make the system more navigable for everyone involved, applicants and officials alike.
Simplicity leads to consistency.
Ideally, yes.
Yeah.
Now, third, regarding that push for more data visibility and control.
If the state wants that power, it needs to be accountable for it.
Precisely. Recommendation 3, mandate transparency and control. This means transparent governance rules for government access to personal data.
Like the OECD principles suggested.
Exactly. Publicly disclose the specific principles guiding data access. Implement robust, independent audit tracking so we can see how data is being used. The public needs the ability to verify that these powerful tools are being used responsibly and ethically, especially when managing migration and labor.
Okay. Transitional status, simplification, transparency. What's the final piece?
Recommendation 4, shift the overall goal towards integration over control. This means expanding legal, predictable pathways for workers, especially vulnerable ones.
Pathways that guarantee rights and safety.
Yes. The whole policy mindset needs to shift away from just maximizing administrative control and minimizing short-term liability. The focus should be on sustainable, ethical integration that actually benefits the entire society in the long run, not just certain sectors temporarily.
Building a more resilient and fair system overall.
That's the aim. Now, to kind of wrap up this resolution section, our source material actually includes a very powerful ethical framework, almost a memo to the reader.
What does it say?
It uses 2 quotes. First, do not conform to the pattern of this world, which comes from Romans 12.2.
Okay.
And second, it adds a caution. Satan himself masquerades as an angel of light, from 2 Corinthians 11.12.
Interesting. How should we interpret those in this context?
Well, the source isn't pushing a specific religious doctrine. It's using these as strong metaphors, as an ethical call for discernment.
Discernment about what?
About the structures we live in. The call is to critically examine the pattern of this world, the system we've just analyzed, to question things that might be presented as purely good, as economic salvation or light, like the tourism boost narrative.
When in reality, they might facilitate darker outcomes like precarity, division, or excessive control.
Exactly. It's a reminder to look beneath the surface. And crucially, the source couples this with a clear ethical directive. Analyze and critique the structure, but firmly prohibit hate speech or blaming the people who are caught within that structure.
Focus on the system, not the individuals. That's the essence we needed to get across. Okay, that was a lot to unpack. For you, the listener who's come with us on this deep dive, turning this understanding into something tangible is the next step. We call this your mission, ladder level 1.
Right. We want this analysis to be useful. So first step, download the summary PDF we've put together for this episode.
What's in the PDF?
It syncs up that FICT-HYP table approach we use. It clearly lays out the verifiable data points, the $8.5 billion revenue figure, the 15-day visa limit, the 200 categories separating them from the structural hypotheses and interpretations we've drawn from them. It helps you see the building blocks of the analysis.
Okay, download the PDF. What's second?
Second, we actually need your help. We need eyes and ears on the ground. We've set up an anonymous submission form for data or field observations.
What kind of observations?
If you're seeing these dynamics play out in your own experience, maybe you work in the platform economy, maybe you interact with people affected by these visa issues, if you see evidence of this funneling of low-rights labor into specific roles, your anonymous input helps us validate or refine the analysis. It adds real-world texture.
Got it. Anonymous form. And third?
Third, take this conversation local. Use the 10-minute community dialogue kit we've prepared. It's just a set of simple, structured questions based on the core ideas we discussed.
To start conversations with friends, family, colleagues.
Exactly. This kind of structural insight is most powerful when it's shared and discussed within communities. It helps move the conversation past the easy surface narratives. #12. Final provocative thought.
Okay, so as we wrap up, let's just circle back for a final thought. We talked about the striking success of a company like Coupang.
Huge growth, strong profits, market approval.
All happening within this environment that seems reliant on concentrated consumer attention and a very flexible, often high-risk, low-rights labor force.
Right, so the provocative question we want to leave you mulling over is this. If the government's official goal is genuine, long-term economic stability and shared prosperity,
Which is usually what governments say they want.
right, then why does the actual design of the current visa and labor structure seem to maximize short-term flexibility by, arguably, incentivizing individual precarity and risk?
Seems contradictory.
It raises the question, what is the real hidden long-term cost of achieving this structural flexibility today?
Yeah.
Especially when it seems to depend on this hidden subsidy of low rights, high individual risk, and the constant potential for social tension bubbling underneath.
That calculation, the true cost versus the perceived benefit, that's something we really need to consider.
It arguably determines the actual stability and health of the whole system going forward.
We are the watchmen. We need to sound the alarm, blow the trumpet, not just when there's an obvious crisis at the gate, but when we see issues in the fundamental structure itself.
Well said.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.
한국의 중국 단체 관광객 15일 무비자 시범 운영 소식. 꼭 알아야 할 점들 지금부터 딱 정리해 드릴게요. 자, 정부가 경제 좀 살려보자고 내년 6월까지 문을 연 건데요. 근데 이게 그냥 와, 관광객이다 하고 끝날 문제가 아닐 수도 있다는 거죠. 좀 다른 시각으로 볼 필요가 있어요. 우선 첫째로, 이게 혹시 일손 부족한 곳에 비자 없이 사람들을 데려오는 뭐랄까 숨겨진 문 같은 거 아니냐는 거예요. 복잡한 비자 절차 없이 들어오니까요. 근데 문제는 호주 같은 나라엔 중간다리 역할하는 비자가 있는데 우린 그런 게 없어서 일부 사람들이 어쩌다 보니 정식 체류 자격 없이 예를 들면 배달 앱 같은 플랫폼 일을 하게 될 수도 있다는 걱정이 있는 거죠. 그리고 둘째, 데이터 관리 문제도 빼놓을 수 없어요. 정부가 이번 기회에 사람들 신분 정보 같은 걸로 누가 어디에 있는지 더 자세히 파악하려고 할 수 있다는 거예요. 이걸 행정적 가시성이라고 부르는데 이걸로 세금을 더 걷거나 복지를 줄이는 데 쓸 수도 있지 않냐는 우려죠. 실제로 OECD 같은 국제기구에서도 정부가 개인정보를 너무 쉽게 들여다보는 건 조심해야 한다고 얘기하고 있거든요. 결국 이번 무비자 정책은요, 관광객 유치라는 좋은 면도 있지만 그 뒤에 숨어있는 노동 문제나 데이터 감시 같은 좀 복잡한 질문들을 우리에게 던져주고 있는 셈이에요.
문이 열렸다. 경제를 살리기 위해서라고 했다. 그러나 그 문은 누구를 통과시키고 무엇을 바꾸는가? 이런 질문으로 오늘 이야기를 시작해볼까 합니다. 최근에 한국 정부가 중국 단체 관광객에게 문을 연다는 소식, 당신도 들으셨죠?
네, 그 발표가 있고 나서 여러 반응들이 있었죠.
맞아요. 시위 얘기도 있었고 정부에서는 또 외국인 혐오 행위 단속 지시도 내렸다고 하고요. 겉으로 보기에는 그냥 관광 활성화 정책이구나 이렇게 생각하기 쉬운데요. 근데 오늘 저희는 당신이 공유해 주신 자료들을 보면서 조금 더 깊이 들어가 보려고 합니다. 이 관광의 문이라는 게 혹시 우리가 잘 보지 못하는 다른 문? 예를 들면 저임금 노동력이라든지 아니면 새로운 어떤 통제 방식으로 이어지는 건 아닌가 하는 거죠.
네, 그런 가능성을 열어두고 살펴보는 게 중요합니다.
그래서 이번 분석에서는 이 무비자 정책이 단순히 관광객 수 늘리는 걸 넘어서서 노동시장이나 개인 데이터 관리, 심지어는 우리의 주의력을 관리하는 방식하고 어떻게 연결될 수 있는지 그 구조적인 본질을 좀 보려고 합니다. 찬반을 나누기보다는 그 작동 원리를 이해하는 데 초점을 맞춰보죠.
좋습니다. 정책의 의도란 그 결과 사이에는 늘 어떤 간극이 있기 마련이니까요. 오늘 자료들을 통해서 이 정책이 실제로 어떤 연쇄 효과를 가져올 수 있는지 그 가능성을 여러 각도에서 한번 비춰보겠습니다.
네, 그럼 첫 번째 이야기부터 시작해볼까요? 한국의 비자 시스템. 이거 자료 보니까 정말 복잡하더라고요. 200가지가 넘는다고요.
네, 맞습니다. 굉장히 세분화되어 있죠.
그러다 보니까 이게 일관성이 있냐? 이런 논란도 계속 있었는데 이번 무비자 정책은 이 복잡한 필터를 잠시 좀 비껴가는 그런 조치라고 볼 수 있겠네요.
그렇죠. 특정 집단에 한해서요. 그런데 문제는 이렇게 입국 시점의 관리에만 너무 집중하다 보면요. 정작 한국에 머무는 동안 사람들이 겪는 실제 어려움은 좀 놓치기 쉽다는 점이 지적됩니다.
예를 들면 어떤 걸까요?
가령 합법적으로 일할 수 없는 상태인데 생계를 이어가야 하잖아요. 그럴 때 어쩔 수 없이 미등록 상태가 되거나 아니면 굉장히 불안정한 플랫폼 노동시장으로 흘러들어가는 그런 생존의 덫에 빠질 수 있다는 분석이 있는 거죠.
합법적인 테두리 안에서 해결이 안 되니까 결국 더 취약한 쪽으로 밀려날 수밖에 없다. 이런 거군요.
네. 결과적으로 보면 국가는 좀 값싸고 유연한 노동력을 확보하면서도 이들에게 정식 체류자에게 주어지는 어떤 복지 혜택이라든지 이런 걸 제공할 의무는 최소화하는 효과를 얻을 수도 있다는 해석이 가능합니다.
그러니까 권리 접근성이 낮아질 수 있다.
그렇죠. 보이지 않는 노동력의 규모가 커질 수 있다는 함의가 있습니다.
여기서 흥미로운 비교 사례가 있더라고요. 호주 사례?
네. 브리징 비자 말씀이시죠?
네, 맞아요. 비자 상태가 바뀌는 그 중간 기간에도 합법적으로 머물 수 있게 해주는 다리 같은 역할을 하는 거잖아요. 의도치 않게 불법 체류자가 되는 걸 막아주는 장치고요.
맞습니다. 그런데 한국에는 그런 유사한 장치가 좀 부족하다는 지적이 나오는 거죠. 그리고 여기서 더 나아가서 이게 그냥 단순히 시스템이 미비한 건지 아니면 어쩌면 이런 틈새를 용인하거나 심지어 활용하려는 어떤 구조적인 유인이 있는 건 아닌지 이런 질문을 던져볼 필요가 있는 겁니다.
시스템의 빈틈이 의도된 결과를 낳는 건 아닐까 하는 좀 무서운 질문이네요.
생각해볼 지점이죠.
자, 그럼 이번에는 신분증, 아이디 문제랑 데이터 문제로 넘어가 보겠습니다. 우리가 신분증 갱신하거나 자격 증명하는 거 그냥 행정 절차 같잖아요.
네, 그렇죠.
근데 이게 사실 정부 입장에서는 우리가 어디에 있고 어떤 상태인지 파악하고 관리하는 아주 중요한 수단이라는 거죠. 자료에서는 이걸 행정적 가시성이라고 표현하던데요. 말 그대로 시스템 안에서 우리가 보이는 상태가 되는 겁니다.
네, 그렇게 보여야 세금을 부과하거나 자원을 배분하거나 아니면 반대로 어떤 혜택을 줄이거나 하는 게 가능해지니까요.
그렇죠. 그리고 여기서 흥미로운 전략이 언급되는데 새로운 제도나 좀 제한된 혜택 같은 걸 도입할 때요. 처음에는 소수 집단한테 먼저 적용을 시켜보는 거죠.
일종의 시험 적용처럼요.
네. 그래서 좀 거부감을 낮춘 다음에 점차 대상을 넓혀가는 방식, 뭐랄까 비율 희석 전략이라고 할 수도 있겠네요.
그런 방식이 쓰일 수 있겠군요.
그런데 이렇게 정부가 개인 데이터에 접근하고 활용하는 문제는 국제적으로도 굉장히 중요한 이슈잖아요. OECD에서도 2022년에 관련 선언을 발표했더라고요.
맞습니다. 정부가 민간 기업이 보유한 개인 데이터에 접근할 필요성은 인정하지만 그게 무제한적이어서는 안 된다. 명확한 원칙과 한계가 있어야 한다는 내용이죠.
그렇죠. 함부로 접근하면 안 된다는 공감대가 있는 건데 우리나라 상황을 보면 얼마 전에도 통신사에서 대규모 개인정보 유출 사건이 있었잖아요. 2,700만 명이었나요?
네, 8월에 있었죠. 과징금도 부과됐고요. 그만큼 데이터 관리가 중요하다는 걸 다시 한번 보여준 사례인데 이런 상황에서 만약 정부의 데이터 접근 역량이 점점 더 강화되고 이게 앞서 이야기한 노동이나 이주관리 시스템하고 결합된다면 어떨까요?
그게 바로 우려되는 지점이죠.
네, 자료들은 바로 그 점을 경고하고 있습니다. 데이터 접근 능력이 제도화될수록 사람들을 관리하고 통제하는 정밀도가 이전과는 뭐랄까 비교할 수 없을 정도로 높아질 수 있다는 거죠. 기술 발전이 가져올 수 있는 또 다른 이면이라고 할 수 있습니다. 효율성 뒤에 숨겨진 통제 가능성이요.
자, 이번에는 조금 다른 각도에서 한번 볼까요? 혹시 빵과 서커스라는 말 들어보셨죠?
네, 고대 로마 이야기죠. 대중의 관심을 다른 데로 돌리는 거요.
맞아요. 근데 자료에 보니까 오늘날 이게 버전 2.0으로 진화했다. 이런 분석이 있더라고요.
버전 2.0이요? 그건 어떤 의미일까요?
과거에는 뭐 검투 경기나 전차 경주 같은 걸로 광장에 사람들을 모았다면 지금은 그 방식이 좀 다르다는 거죠. 사회적 분열이나 불안감 같은 내부 문제는 예를 들어 뭐 국가 간의 역사 갈등 같은 외부 이슈로 돌리고요.
아, 시선을 밖으로 돌리고.
그렇죠. 그러는 동안 사람들의 시간과 관심은 집안에서 즐기는 OTT 서비스나 게임, 배달음식 같은 걸로 흡수된다는 분석입니다. 사우트 차이나 모닝포스트 같은 외신에서도 비슷한 지적을 하기도 했고요.
확실히 팬데믹 이후로 그런 경영이 더 강해진 것 같기도 해요. 집에서 보내는 시간이 늘어나면서요.
네. 그리고 실제로 한국의 플랫폼 노동자들에 대한 여러 연구들을 보면 건강이나 안전 문제에 더 많이 노출되고 특히 이주 노동자들이 이 분야에 좀 집중되는 경향이 나타난다고 해요. 배달 인프라가 우리 사회에 얼마나 깊숙이 자리 잡았는지 보여주는 거죠.
네, 관련 시장 데이터도 그런 흐름을 뒷받침합니다. 예를 들어서 쿠팡 같은 기업의 2025년 2분기 실적을 보면 매출이나 이익이 전년 대비 계속 성장하는 모습을 보이고 있거든요. 영업이익도 흑자를 기록했고요. 최근 투자 관련 보도에서도 쿠팡 주식의 어떤 기술적 강도가 언급되기도 했고요.
결국 사람들이 외부 활동은 줄이고 주의력은 점점 더 온라인 플랫폼, 그러니까 OTT나 배달, 인터넷 쇼핑 같은 곳으로 옮겨가고
그렇죠. 그 현상이 관련 기업들한테는 성장에 유리한 환경을 만들어주고 있다는 분석입니다. 사회적 분위기의 기술 그리고 자본의 흐름이 서로 맞물려 돌아가는 모습인 거죠.
네, 지금까지 쭉 따라와 보니 이 무비자 정책이라는 하나의 사건에서 시작해서 노동 문제, 데이터 문제, 그리고 우리의 주의력 문제까지 이게 다 연결되어 있다는 느낌이 드네요.
맞습니다. 퍼즐 조각들이 맞춰지는 것 같죠.
여기서 중요한 건 뭐랄까 특정 집단이나 사람을 비난하는 게 아니라 이런 현상을 만들어내는 구조 자체를 이해하려는 노력이 필요한 것 같습니다. 어린 아이부터 어른까지 우리 모두가 이 구조를 좀 제대로 볼 필요가 있어요.
정확합니다. 정책은 관광을 이야기하지만 실제 시장과 기술은 노동력과 주의력을 활용하는 방향으로 움직이고 있다는 것. 이 둘 사이의 간극, 그 본질을 보는 게 중요합니다.
그리고 아이디 카드나 데이터 접근 권한, 복지 혜택 같은 것들이요. 그 자체로 좋거나 나쁜 건 아니잖아요.
그렇죠. 어떻게 사용되느냐가 문제죠. 사람들을 돕는 도구가 될 수도 있고 반대로 나누고 통제하는 칼이 될 수도 있는 겁니다. 우리가 주목해야 할 건 바로 이 시스템과 구조 그 자체입니다.
그렇다면 우리는 뭘 생각해 볼 수 있을까요? 이 복잡한 구조 앞에서요. 자료들에서 몇 가지 방향을 제시하고 있던데요.
네, 몇 가지 제안들이 있었죠. 첫째는 아까 이야기했던 호주의 브리징 비자처럼 비자 변경 과정에서 갑자기 불법 체류자가 되는 그런 의도치 않은 상황을 막을 수 있는 제도적 장치를 마련하는 겁니다. 일종의 안전망이죠.
두 번째는 그 200가지 넘는 복잡한 비자 종류를 좀 단순화하고 예측 가능성을 높여서 혼란을 줄이는 거고요.
네, 그것도 중요한 부분입니다. 그리고 셋째는 정부가 개인 데이터에 접근할 때 그 원칙을 좀 투명하게 공개하고 제대로 감시하고 추적할 수 있는 시스템을 만드는 것. OECD 원칙 같은 걸 참고해서요.
기술 남용을 막기 위한 장치네요.
그렇습니다. 넷째로는 단순히 통제하기보다는 합법적인 경로를 좀 더 넓혀서 취약한 노동자들이 권리와 안전을 보장받으면서 사회 통합될 수 있도록 방향을 전환하는 걸 생각해 볼 수 있습니다.
네, 결국 단속보다는 통합과 권리 보장 쪽으로 가야 한다는 거군요.
그리고 이 모든 논의의 바탕에는 정말 중요한 원칙이 있습니다. 우리가 현상과 구조를 비판적으로 분석하되 이게 결코 특정 사람이나 집단에 대한 혐오로 이어져서는 안 된다는 점입니다. 자료 내에서도 윤리적인 부분을 계속 강조하고 있고요.
맞습니다. 구조의 문제를 지적하는 것이지 사람을 공격하자는 게 아니니까요.
네,
자, 오늘 저희는 공식적으로는 관광을 위한 문이지만 실제로는 유연한 노동력을 확보하고 데이터 통제를 강화하는 통로로 기능할 수도 있다는 가능성을 살펴봤습니다. 그럼 여기서 마지막 질문을 던져봅니다. 우리 사회에 이와 비슷하게 작동하는 또 다른 문은 없을까요? 겉으로 내세우는 이름과 실제 작동 방식이 다른 그런 문들이요. 어쩌면 우리는 우리가 아직 보지 못하고 있는 더 큰 구조 속에 있는 건 아닐까요? 당신은 어떻게 생각하시나요? 오늘 저희는 한국의 무비자 정책을 시작으로 노동과 감시 그리고 주의력 경제라는 더 넓은 구조까지 함께 탐험해 보았습니다. 좀 복잡한 문제였지만 그 본질을 이해하려고 노력해 주신 당신께 감사드립니다. 더 자세한 내용이나 오늘 분석한 fact, 그러니까 사실과 HYP, 가설을 동기화한 표가 필요하시면 저희 웹사이트에서 요약 PDF 파일을 내려받으실 수 있습니다.
네, 그리고 혹시 현장에서 비슷한 경험을 하셨거나 관련 데이터가 있다면 익명으로 제보해 주실 수도 있고요.
그리고 이 주제에 대해 주변 분들과 더 이야기 나누고 싶으시다면 10분 토론을 위한 커뮤니티 대화 키트도 준비되어 있으니 활용해 보세요. 우리는 파수꾼입니다. 우리는 나팔을 불어야 합니다.